Hello and welcome. My name is Arnau Roig, and I'm Professor of Gender and Communication at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. Welcome to the Indiana University Cinema and the screening of Gregg Araki's 1993 film, Totally Fucked Up, which is part of the Forever Queer Community Memory and Survival film series. And I think the title to the series is very fitting to this screening because precisely community and memory and survival are going to be very present in this movie that portrays this close-knit, racially diverse group of six non-heterosexual teenagers in LA. The movie is by the director, queer Californian filmmaker Gregg Araki, and he was 34 by the time he did this movie. This is his fourth movie after two very underground, not very famous movies in the beginning, and the one that made him absolutely famous to the rest of the world, The Living End in 1992. The Living End was quoted by Ruby Rich in her influential article about the new queer cinema, the article that actually coined the term new queer cinema and that included other titles around that time, like Paris is Burning by Jenny Livingston, 1990, Poison by Todd Haynes in 1991, My Own Private Idaho by Gus Van Sant in 1991. This wave of movies that were very successful in festivals around 1991, 1992, were very much unapologetic. They rejected cinematic conventions, but very knowing of the cinematic conventions that they were using. Ruby Rich even called them homo pomo, this homosexual post-modernity, using pastiche, using irony, and being very much aware of what they were doing. Also, these movies have a common thread, which is the defiance of death. And it was precisely The Living End by Gregg Araki that made it into the wave. This road movie about escaping AIDS, kind of a queer Thelma and Louise. Because when one of the characters receives the diagnosis of AIDS, this, instead of becoming a death sentence, it becomes some sort of a liberation, and they start their escape to the future. The Living End is very important for the film that we're going to watch today because it relates very directly to Totally Fucked Up, which is only 1 year later. Totally Fucked Up is the first of the three titles that Gregg Araki calls the Teen Apocalypse Trilogy, together with The Doom Generation 2 years later in 1995 and Nowhere 2 years later in 1997. Also, around 1997, Ruby Rich, the same person who coined the term new queer cinema, says that it's around that time, it's when new queer cinema dies because it goes from a radical impulse to a niche market. And we can see that in many of mainstream gay and lesbian movies of the 90s that took from this new queer cinema. But still, in Totally Fucked Up, we're still at the very beginning of the trilogy. We're still at the very beginning of the wave, and you'll see how it relates to the topics of new queer cinema overall. Also, personally, I feel that Gregg Araki's movie Kaboom in 2010 is his way of actually closing the trilogy, the Teen Apocalypse trilogy. And in that movie, Kaboom, there's an actual apocalypse that finishes life on Earth. So let's dive into this beginning of the trilogy, Totally Fucked Up, the title that we're going to watch today. The title comes from the character of James Duval called Andy, and it's how he refers to himself. James Duval becomes Gregg Araki's diva, and he appears in all three titles of the trilogy, plus also Kaboom. According to Gregg Araki, this movie is about AIDS, alienation, suicide, drugs, fag bashing, violence, and not having a date on a Saturday night. I feel that in this movie, Araki brings something that is not present in all new queer cinema titles, which is camp. He's perpetuating this tradition of Andy Warhol and Kenneth Anger and Paul Morrissey and John Waters. This camp as a language of queers to talk to other queers. Or, as Richard Dyer says, taking the form away from its content. We will see this form away from the content in all the intertitles in the movie, in the scenes, the mise en scène, especially in the shots that are outside and then reflect a very aggressive and alienated Los Angeles. Kind of a dangerous setting, but the characters remain oblivious to it all throughout. I'm sure that the audience will not be oblivious to the big panels and advertising signs that you'll see during the movie. According to author Glenn Davis, who wrote a book on Iraqi cinema, Iraqi's camp and tradition that links to the new queer cinema is based on mostly five different things. The first one is the performance style. The performances in this movie are not natural. It's kind of saying that natural performances, method performances are never realistic. So the performances here call attention or draw attention to themselves because they are pretty much terrible. But we are in the joke, right, of these performances. The movie also includes trashy ephemera, like the famous game Heartthrob. One of the characters will say that its heterosexuality is boring even as a board game. It also includes parody. The same Gregg Araki talks about this movie as a kind of cross between avant-garde experimental cinema and a queer John Hughes film. And if we think of movies like Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller, Gregg Araki here is reworking the conventions of other teen films into queer discourses and queer stories. He creates those characters that are not perfect with, and I'm quoting the director here again, with all their lovable confusions and complexities. This is also very telling of new queer cinema because those characters never intended to be perfect and hygienic and clean, but rather have rough edges and things that make them deeper and that make the audience be able to relate to the things that they're saying and the things that they're leaving. Another of the things that links this to new queer cinema and camp is having a very clear political aim. In the same way that The Living End was talking about AIDS, in this movie, we'll see that there's an overarching topic that appears at the beginning and at the end of the movie, which is teen suicide. These alienated queer teenagers and the relation with suicide and death is going to be a pervasive topic. And finally, there's continuous references to early queer camp. I've already given some of those references, but you will have to hunt for them during the movie. So I hope you enjoy this gem from when the new queer cinema still had the radical push of its beginning. Thanks so much for your attention and enjoy.